Well, I had a brief yesterday to complete in 5 minutes, and I actually spoke my last word as the countdown clock, which was being displayed, hit 0, for which I got a round of applause, and by which I put an awful lot of pressure on the other 5 speakers who are due to speak immediately after me. So my brief for today is 10 minutes, and my title is Breaking Exadata. Now, of course, this is the marketing title, right? Doing things which aren't really a very good idea on Exadata doesn't sound quite so sexy. So breaking Exadata, it pulls the crowd in a little bit. So just as a very brief description of threat, so that people are aware that Exadata isn't the total solution to every possible question. It's worth considering what it is about Exadata that is good, and therefore turning your back on what the marketeers are telling you and thinking, what about Exadata is less good? What could I do which doesn't actually fit the role that Exadata is marketed to sell, to fill? So we look at the USPs, the unique selling points. See, I've learned marketing speak. Unique selling points. Of course, hybrid columnar compression, terribly, terribly important for Exadata. Storage indexes, the huge benefit of not doing work if you can possibly avoid work, and avoiding work as cheaply as possible. Smart flash cache, the cache which is down at the far end near the disks and allows you to avoid visiting disks, and the smart scan offload type technology. These are probably the biggest points that come into play when someone says Exadata is miraculous, it will do whatever you want as fast as you want it to do it. So let's look at an Exadata machine or a schematic of an Exadata machine and see what it's doing and talk about why it's helping us, and then we'll stick a couple of holes straight through the middle of it as to sometimes it cannot help us as much as we might think. So what have we got? Exadata, we've got a couple of machines sitting up there at the front ends, the database servers, as we might call them. We've got a database instance running, and we've got an ASM instance running there, the little pink clouds. They've got to be clouds because we talk Cloudland, and they're pink because that's the closest I could get to Oracle's red. We've got the CPUs, we've got the memory and all the rest of it sitting there. These are the things that run databases for us. We have a small number of those. At the other end of some sort of networky thing, we have similar bits of hardware, but that similar hardware runs a very stripped down type of Oracle instance. It's just a cell server code. And we've got several of those, rather more than we have of the database servers. And we've got a sort of one-way networking system which says the cell servers don't actually talk to each other. The communication comes top to bottom. The database instance is talking down to the cell servers. And when we fire in a query here, the database server is able to figure out what I/O it needs to do in order to address that query, and has sufficient information about what's going on that it can break that query down, it can do a sort of parallel decomposition and so forth, and end up doing things like table scans or index fast full scans, sending messages to exactly the cell server which holds exactly the data which the query might need. So we don't have to have any worry about a database server sending a partial query, a decomposed query section, down to the wrong cell server, and the cell server having to chat back and forth across the network rather than up and down in order to find the data to send back. So there's a very clean, tidy breakdown. You do the work you need to do, and you avoid doing as much as you possibly can. One automatic consequence, by the way, that you pick up from the picture is that the queries are inherently parallel execution. There's no question of a serial execution because the data is spread across different cell servers and the query is decomposed to address those different cell servers simultaneously. So parallel execution kicks in automatically. Now, in light of that picture, let's pick up the USPs again. I've added in here at the top parallel. I mean, the thing is implicitly a parallel execution machine. Even if your query appears to be a serial query, we can dispatch queries, requests for blocks off to multiple data server, cell servers. So that's an interesting aspect of what's going on. Right? If you crank your parallelism up a bit, maybe you can overload the scanners down at the far end there. But let's look at what the other USPs actually mean for us. Hybrid columnar compression. Well, what it's trying to do, of course, is reduce the I/O. How much actual physical work do we do scanning disks? The more rows we can stick into a single megabyte of disk, the less physical I/O actually has to take place. And this seems to be rather a nice sort of idea. Storage indexes, what do they do for us? Well, we don't even read the megabyte of data if we don't really need it. So we have a very dense, compact little bit of information about each megabyte of disk saying, if you've got a query coming in which is asking for this particular column which happens to be stored in this particular megabyte, then we can decide whether or not to read that particular megabyte in a very early preemptive fashion, and we can simply return a message saying, I know, because I've recorded the low value, the high value, and the number of nulls for that particular megabyte, I know that that megabyte won't give us any data. I don't physically actually need to read it. So again, we cut down the I/O. And of course we have the smart cache there. Not only do we not necessarily have to go to disk to read megabytes, we might even find that yes, we need this megabyte, but oh, how terribly convenient it happens to be in the cache, so we don't pay the penalty of the physical access. Everything is geared towards the idea of minimizing how much work we do actually physically getting stuff off disk. Right? Every one of those USPs is about cut down physical disk I/O. The last one being slightly different, because with the offload business, not only do we have the thing which says go and look at the data, we can apply predicates to the data and decide which rows we might need, which columns we might need, and not send back the actual data that's stored on disk, but send back the correct or the minimum subset of the data items which is on disk. So we also minimize network traffic. So these are the ways in which Exadata can make things as efficient as possible. Okay, so how do we break it? How do we do things which Exadata really, really does not like or cannot cope with terribly well because it manages to make all these USPs unusable? And whatever technology Oracle sells you, that's the sort of question you always ought to ask. It's easy to listen to someone describing how fantastic a feature is and think, hey, wow, it's really good, it's really great, it sounds so positive. Right? And the moment you've got that far, you need to sit back and think, and now where is it less good? What do I give it? What load do I give it? What type of activity do I give it? Which says, if Oracle's doing it this way to make this sound good, what else can happen? What are the alternatives? What are the boundary conditions where things don't behave so nicely? Now at this point, I'm just glancing down at my clock to see how much time I've got left, and I've realized that the screen has cleared and I'll have to type in my password in order to be able to see how much time I've got left. So I'm just going to carry on talking. When it beeps, I'm just going to stop, okay? Luckily, there isn't much to go. So what breaks? So what doesn't play to the strengths of Exadata? Well, one classic example is ETL. I mean, the number of sites I've been on where you end up with someone saying, well, we've got this table and we've got 783 columns in this table, right? Yeah, fine. I mean, you can load data into a system and you've got an awful lot of columns. And then what do we do with it? Well, whatever we do with it, we tend not to be particularly selective about the columns, and we don't get to be particularly selective about the rows. So we don't actually get a lot of this benefit of take your enormous wide rows and your enormous number of columns and only give me a small number of rows and a small number of columns. So that blows out of the system quite a lot of this benefit of minimize the traffic down the network. And then of course we run into this thing which says, well, okay, so they're big, but we could get really good compression, right? Except you don't want to use it. Because one of the problems with compression is that when you're passing packets down the network from the database server to the cell server will pick up a megabyte, you know, when it's nicely compressed, and say, okay, I will expand this out and extract the data I need, which, because your ETL happens to be a lot of it, oh, and by the way, now that I've decompressed it, what I've got to pass you is so big, it exceeds the megabyte limit of the unit packet I'm allowed to send you. So having gone to all the trouble of decompressing this data, I'm going to send you the original compressed stuff anyway, and you can decompress it when it gets there. So compression, it says compression failure. Compression doesn't exactly fail. Compression works so well that you can see that you can't send the decompressed result up. It happens twice. Decompression happens twice. And you've got statistics about number of number of CUs, the number of compression units examined, and the number of compression units decompressed. And for some strange reason, the number decompressed is twice the number examined, because they got decompressed at the cell server end, and then they got sent in compressed form back up to the database end and decompressed again. Remember this? You might have, 12 cell servers down the bottom working away doing decompression and failing, and they send the results up to two database servers which do the decompression all over again. CPU is going to disappear like crazy when that sort of thing happens. So you can play to the weaknesses of Exadata. Think about what it gives you, then think about when it's not going to work. Be careful with what you do with ETL. You may exactly hit the spot, but Exadata does not really help. Oh, and of course, what else do you do with your ETL? Well, with any sort of large-scale queries, you do hash joins. Oh, and you often do parallel hash joins because they're supposed to go faster. Well, if you come to my TED talk tomorrow, I will give you the biggest... bye. I will give you the biggest, most important soundbite about parallel hash joins, right? The big soundbite about parallel hash joins is that the execution plans aren't things that you will easily understand, and which even OEM gets completely wrong when it tells you what happened first, okay? Big thing about hash joins, if you do the wrong type of hash join in parallel, the distribution of hash distribution, you dump enormous volumes of intermediate result down to disk almost inevitably, even if it's got big memory and it's a big Exadata machine. You take your hash join and the intermediate result, you dump the whole lot to disk, and a bit later you read the whole lot back again. What do you not do with it when you're doing a hash join? You don't compress it. Right? You can't. That's not the way Oracle works. You dump the whole lot down. When you read it back, what do you read back? Everything. No row elimination, no column elimination, nothing. What about the smart flash cache? The smart flash cache is so quick and so good it says, hey, that's temp stuff. I don't cache temp stuff because you're not going to need it again. It goes down to disk, it comes off disk. You can cripple an Exadata machine if you do very large hash joins in parallel and you end up doing hash distribution all over the place. I speak from experience. And the trouble is, the queries do actually go incredibly quickly. But when someone's told you they're going to be mind-bogglingly, amazingly quickly, joining 4 terabytes of data to 850 gigabytes of data and still taking 15 minutes to get the result makes you cross. It's a miracle, but it's not good enough because you've been sold something which says it's blindingly fast. Okay, so you can find ways of hitting Exadata where it cannot fight back. That's it. And I've overrun my 10 minutes, but you're going to applaud me anyway. Thank you.